Good morning, Faith Community Church. So good to have you with us. I have Pastor Josh with me here today, and we're going to look at Matthew chapter 7 in our reading from today. And this is one of the passages, especially at the beginning, the first few verses, is something that I think a lot of Christians have a difficult time applying to themselves. Right? We can look at other people when they're maybe acting hypocritical or when they're judging other people, but for us and ourselves, I think it's one of those difficult passages for us to recognize when we're doing what Jesus tells us not to do here. So, why don't you share with us some of your thoughts on Matthew 7?
Yeah, as we look through it, Jesus kind of has, there's five major sections where Jesus gives teaching. He uses illustration, kind of a parable, and he deals with kind of one key issue as you boil everything down. He deals with the idea of hypocrisy, and it's easy to be concerned with other people and ignore the sin in our life too. And that's what he does. Is he's calling the people to having a personal response to him, a personal response of righteousness, and following him, and doing that in a sincere way where it's not just kind of an outward show. And that's what most of these deal with. So if you look down, starting in verse 1, he talks about don't judge so that you will not be judged. He deals with this, and he gives the illustration of looking at the speck in a brother's eye, but having a log in your own eye.
Right.
Being more concerned with, hey, let me help you with the speck in your eye when I have this huge log in my eye. And the whole point that Jesus is trying to deal with is, hey, if you have a problem in your life, don't focus on other people's problems and sins. Like you need to deal with your own sin in your life,
Right.
and deal with that first, and make sure that you're doing what's right and that you're honoring the Lord. And that's what a lot of these other teachings in the chapter deal with.
Right. And so what advice, a practical way for someone as they looking at themselves after reading this passage and noticing maybe they do have a log in their own eye, what advice would you give that person as far as what the next step should be?
Yeah, really turning to the Lord and acknowledging to Him that this is sin, Lord. I know that this violates your word. It's not pleasing to you, and so, Lord, I want to deal with it. Would you help me to turn from that? And that's what he really does. If you look at verse 13, he gives the illustration of the wide and narrow gate, right? And here there's two gates, there's two paths, the wide and the narrow, and he says you need to enter by the narrow gate. So rather than looking at, well, all these people are going down the wide way and the wide gate, and it's like, no, you need to do what is right, honor Lord, and follow Him. So it's like this personal response is what he keeps going back to. And you see that in verses 15 through 20 about the tree and the fruit. You have the good tree and the good fruit and the bad tree and the bad fruit, and one can't produce the other. That it's like he's wanting consistency, just like a good tree produces good fruit and a bad tree bad fruit. That for us, rather than being hypocritical and
Right.
and not sincerely following the Lord and putting that into practice, he's saying no, like you need to be what you ought to be, and follow the Lord and be sincere in that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for us as we're reading through today's reading to not be thinking about like, oh, I know who needs to hear this.
Yeah.
Right. But instead, to do what Jesus asked us to do and really examine ourselves. And so I would challenge you to spend, some time after today's reading just in prayer, asking that God would reveal these things to you in your heart, and the Spirit would convict you when necessary, and then do what Pastor Josh said is to turn to the Lord and repent of those sins and then move forward.
Yeah. And just to wrap up verses 24 through 27, and Jesus gives the parable of the foundations. And let me just read that for us, because I think that is really, if we could just have that really stuck in our memory, it's going to help us. He says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell and the floods came. The winds blew and slammed against the house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. And Jesus is saying, hey, you hear my word, and you need to respond to it.
Right.
You need to put it into practice. And then he gives the rest of the parable, those that hear the word and do not act accordingly, they don't put it into practice, they don't respond in obedience, they're going to be like the foolish man building on a bad foundation, and it's not going to hold. So for us, we need to respond to the Lord personally, not worried about,
Right.
what this person or that person is doing, but it's like I need to follow the Lord and follow his word.
Yep. Great stuff. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. God bless.
Bye-bye.